The Institute of Risk Management, South Africa's annual risk report, provides insightful information for decision makers in all organizations. The eighth incarnation, the eighth edition of the report, is going to be released in February 22, and I think is going to build on IRMSA's role as a catalyst for positive change in South Africa as far as the risk landscape is concerned. It's reflected in the theme, #StepUpNowIsTheTime. One of the supporters of the report is Andrew Rayner, Chief Risk Officer and Chief Actuary at Discovery. Andrew, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us. Let me start with a broad question, if we can. The global and local risk landscape and outlook, it's continued to change over the past year dramatically. What's your assessment?
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I think there's probably two or three key developments that spring to mind for me. I mean, the first would be the change in the global economy in terms of a return to higher inflation and central banks moving from a period of reducing interest rates and loosening monetary policy to a tightening of policy and an increase in interest rates. Now, I think that's a key development for us in South Africa. I think in much of the other part of the world, most of the rest of the world, there has been an increase in growth, and I think many economies have returned to above pre-COVID levels of operating, and they're seeing inflation. They're seeing partly through pent-up demand, partly through supply shortages, partly through labor shortages, inflation spiking up. And I think probably in those economies, increasing interest rates is the right policy. I do worry about South Africa, though, because I don't think we've quite seen that level of economic restoration that some of the other developed economies have seen. And therefore, if we start following an increasing interest rate pathway to control inflation or to keep the currency at a certain level, I think it could stunt growth here and actually be quite negative for us. So that's one area. The other is probably the other one that stands out is geopolitical tensions. So, I mean, one obvious one is, I'm not sure if any of them are obvious, but one on my mind is China and the US. You know, we've seen, even from the Trump era, trade wars and political tension between the two countries. Now with the Taiwan situation, potentially you've got other parties entering the fray, the UK, Japan, Australia. If something were to happen in that region, I think that could be very, very negative for the global economy. And that plays out in a similar way with Russia and Crimea, where we're seeing tensions in that region, that's sort of getting conflated with power supply and energy supply to Europe. And I think we need to watch that very carefully on how that affects that area. So geopolitical tensions is definitely one. And maybe quickly, I know we're going to speak more about COVID later, but the longevity of COVID, I think we probably naively thought a year ago that we'd all looked at COVID and what it could mean for us, and as an insurer, we'd made provisions for that. And I think a year later, we're probably surprised at how big an impact it's still having on us. So there's two or three areas, Jeremy, that I would highlight.
As you say, we'll return to COVID in just a minute. But in terms of risk planning then, Andrew, for 2024, significant emerging strategic risks. What over the next couple of weeks do risk officers need to be applying their minds to, particularly as far as the domestic agenda is concerned?
Yeah, I think the domestic agenda, I mean, there's a few emerging risks that I think are important here. I think there's a very real risk that South Africa will stay in a low growth environment for the next 5 to 10 years. I think if you look back, probably we've seen 0 to 1% GDP growth realistically, and my concern is that we stay locked into that sort of that world, and that manifests in other ways around job creation, unemployment. We've seen the social unrest that happened earlier in the year. So I think that is a risk of a very low growth economy, that we get trapped into a world where we've got a limited tax base, which is supporting both social payments as well as debt repayments. As debt increases, it increases the load on that tax to service that debt. And therefore, it's harder for the government to generate growth and to invest in growth. So I think that's definitely one area. The other thing that's probably come onto my radar, and it's probably just because it's in the news, but with the recent local government elections, seeing the risk of coalitions being a more pervasive aspect of politics in South Africa. And the risk as we get towards the national elections of a declining ANC share of the vote, maybe leading to a risk of more coalitions. And I fundamentally believe it would probably be a weaker form of government in South Africa, where the minority parties get a disproportionate share of power in those arrangements. So for me, there are a couple of risks there locally. Maybe again, another one is climate risk. I'm really thinking of emerging risks here, Jeremy, in terms of things that are coming through that might not affect us in the next 12 months, but longer term. Climate change absolutely is an emerging risk we need to be concerned about. We need to start doing things now to change behaviors, to change the way we run our businesses, the way we run our lives, and the way we invest our assets. And it is a very long run game. We'll only really see the benefits down the track. But I think that's definitely a risk that we need to pay more attention to. I mean, to give you an example, as the rest of the world accelerates its green agenda, what if South Africa starts attracting green taxes on our products now, because we have a very dirty energy supply in South Africa? And what does that do to exports that we depend very much on to keep the economy going? So definitely a risk that we need to keep an eye on.
What I'm hearing from you as you outline the global picture and the local picture is that never before has good, prudent, and judicious risk management been so important. Critical that risk managers in many ways rethink their approach and even up their game.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you've hopefully seeing the rise of the risk department and the CRO getting more airtime and hopefully respect in their organizations. Not that I think that's lacking in any way, but it is definitely, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of pressures that are converging on business.
Let's look at your space, particularly the healthcare space. What has 2021 been like for you in terms of risk approach? And again, looking forward to 2022 with a specific focus on your sector.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I think looking at our sector, there's absolutely no doubt that the key risk that we've grappled with has been COVID. I think when we entered this year, looking back a year ago, I probably thought that the economic impact of COVID would be just as big as the impact on claims and the cost of lives and so on. And we certainly planned for increased liquidity in the business to make sure we could deal with that. But from an economic point of view, a period of lower sales, higher lapses as people lost their jobs and so on. And I think the reality is that the claims side of COVID has been huge. I think if you look at a business like Discovery, we have, over the period of COVID, I'm talking first, second, third, and potentially fourth waves, probably 6 billion of claims we will have paid over that period. Now, if you play that out across the 4 or 5 major insurers in South Africa, and I'm led to believe that they probably had similar experience. You're looking at 25-30 billion rand of claims that have been paid into the economy, liquidity put back into the economy. And by the way, that's probably not dissimilar from the liquidity back into the economy with the riots in terms of the rebuilding cost there, but that's a separate topic. So COVID for us has been a huge thing to deal with. And what we've seen is that the provisions that people made, like myself, across the industry, and we all thought they were adequate, have turned out not to be adequate. We were probably overly, we were hit badly last December and January with the Beta variant that hit South Africa at the time when people were going on holiday and socializing, and the guards were down. And then I think what we've seen with the Delta variant through July, August, and so on, is a very big wave. And interestingly for us, we've got very strong UK data from our businesses there, as well as South Africa. And just the vaccine penetration in the UK, what it's enabled in that third wave is a separation of the infection rates against the death rates. So they were previously, there was a ratio of those, and you've seen in the third wave in the UK, because of vaccines, although infections have carried on, the deaths have stopped. Because South Africa's behind with its vaccine program in that regard, we haven't seen that separation, and therefore the deaths have carried on being very, very high. It's critical, and you know from my employer that this is a message we are very deeply passionate about. It's critical that we get vaccinated, that we get our staff and our customers and our nation vaccinated. So COVID undoubtedly over the last year and looking forward to next year is a huge challenge. Another one, maybe just to get off of COVID for a moment, I think another one would be cyber risk, Jeremy. We continually, battle cyber attacks. It's you probably only read in the papers about the big ones that get through and that materially affect businesses, but every day there's hundreds or thousands of attacks happening that are successfully repelled. But there's no value add to business. It's effectively a tax on business, having to build defenses against cyber attacks, with stronger staff and systems and insurance and all of those things. And undoubtedly we are so dependent on digital delivery of our services nowadays and servicing that you have to keep those channels open. It's an imperative. So cyber risk, definitely. I don't think you'll ever get to the point where you can sit back and say, we've cracked this one, we're very happy with cyber risk. That maintains a very high profile. And then the economy in general, which we can talk more about.
Andrew Rayner, I want to bring you back to COVID very quickly if we can. As we pre-tape, as we record this interview, there is still an enormous amount of uncertainty around the new variant discovered laudably by South African scientists. How do risk managers factor that uncertainty into their risk planning next year?
Yeah, Jeremy, I think and I can talk from what we're doing. And we're very lucky at Discovery that we have a lot of health data, because we've got a big health administration business and then a big insurance business where we're taking risk with life insurance. We've almost got advanced warning on the risks of our life customers, and essentially this is a risk of dying. That what you're seeing in the medical aid schemes is hospital claims are actually way down because people aren't visiting hospital for normal procedures. So it actually isn't so much a health risk in terms of that health economy. It's a mortality risk. So we have the advantage that we do see that data coming through our health book when people test positive, before they're hospitalized, as they're hospitalized, what they're hospitalized for. So we do have a chance to see what's coming a little bit. I think being deeply involved in the vaccination program and encouraging in every possible way you can is a good way to manage that risk. There's no doubt about the efficacy of vaccines, and that as a strategy is absolutely crucial. I think what other things we're doing are the other things we're doing are making sure that the business is prepared for claim spikes, that we've got the right servicing model in place, that we've got the right liquidity. There's a serious amount of money being paid to policyholders to support them, and you need to make sure you've got the right assets and liquidity in place. So there's some of the methods we're using. Awareness, Jeremy, as well. I mean, as you've seen in the press, Discovery is pushing hard the awareness of vaccines and the need and the efficacy of those.
Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew Rayner, Chief Risk Officer and the Chief Actuary at Discovery. Appreciate the thoughtful insight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.